I'm Clyde Haberman. Welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. I'm filling in for Sam Roberts. The leak of a Supreme Court draft opinion sent the court and the whole country into a panic, with protesters on both sides of the issue gathering around the U.S. The threat of overturning Roe v. Wade has been in the air for some time, and some states have recently passed highly restrictive abortion laws. What might the immediate consequences be if Roe v. Wade is overturned? And as this controversy continues, the COVID pandemic moves beyond its second year, seeming to reinvent itself every few months. Our first guest has been covering the pandemic, both the science and mental health sides of the virus. Pam Bellick joins us via Zoom. Welcome, Pam. To start first with the Supreme Court, I want to discuss the existence of an abortion pill, which is an important element here. But do we have a sense, assuming that Roe v. Wade is struck down, and I guess we need to sort of emphasize that we're not 100% sure that's the case. The document that we saw this week is from February, and it may undergo a good number of changes and perhaps votes. But assuming Roe is gone, what are the foreseeable immediate consequences? It's not going to end abortion in this country, obviously, right?
Right. It won't end abortion, and the country will not be going back to the situation that existed pre-Roe, but it will have really significant effects. What is likely to happen is probably about half of the states, maybe slightly more than half of the states, will very quickly outlaw all abortion. So basically, if Roe is overturned, the Supreme Court is saying states, you get to call the shots on abortion. You can make the laws and you can decide whether it's legal or illegal in your state. And probably, about half the states, the conservative ones, will outlaw all abortion. And then you'll have other states, many of them the blue states, that will preserve the right to abortion in some form. And some of them, like California, Connecticut, New York, will go so far as to try to find ways to assist patients who are living in red states to access abortion in the blue states. So some of those state laws are already in the works from the blue states, trying to pass laws that will help fund travel for patients, that will help protect the potential legal vulnerability of providers, that will help expand the number of providers who can perform abortion. So it's going to be a tug of war, and it is going to take a very divisive, already very, very divisive issue, and have it divide America even more than it already has for decades.
Statistics from the Centers for Disease Control show that about 80% of abortions that do take place now are within the first 10 weeks, I believe, of pregnancy. Am I wrong in assuming that many of the state, even the restrictive state laws, would allow abortions at least at some point within that 10-week period? And so I guess my question is, as monumental a decision as this may be and having enormous social impact, might it have a little bit less medical impact than we're presupposing?
I think it really depends. I mean, there are states that are basically set to ban all abortion
At any point.
And with no exceptions. And then there are going to be states that will have some exceptions, either maybe very early in the pregnancy or for things like rape or the life of the mother. So it will vary, but you will see probably, in half the country, the ability to access abortion will just contract tremendously.
You've written about the abortion pills that exist, and they account apparently for a bit more than half of all abortions now taking place in the U.S. Again, assuming Roe is struck down, the advent of this pill, shouldn't it make it relatively easy to be obtained by mail, even if you're living in a very restrictive state? Unless we turn it totally into a police state, how can the trafficking in pills be stopped?
Yeah, it's a really interesting and good question. Basically, uh, we've reported that you know what if Roe is overturned, abortion pills will kind of be the main battleground for this country's abortion wars, and that's because um, more and more patients are using medication abortion, which is a two-pill combination that can be used up till 10 weeks into pregnancy. So most abortions occur early in pregnancy, and more patients are choosing to abort with pills because it's less expensive. You can take the pill anywhere. It affords a certain amount of privacy that going to a clinic doesn't afford. And and also in recent years, and in fact, just late last year, the federal government, the Food and Drug Administration, has actually taken some steps to increase access to abortion pills. The first drug in the two-pill combination is still very heavily regulated and restricted, but some of those access regulations have been eased recently. So it's a little bit easier. You no longer have to go pick up your pill in person from a doctor. You can get it mailed, which, to your point, is even harder to police. So there are states already. A state law in Texas has outlawed the mailing or the receiving of abortion pills by mail, but it's really very hard to enforce that unless you're going to have every package scanned or
Exactly.
opened.
And that would be a police state sort of situation, Brett.
Exactly. And, people are not ruling that out, but historically, laws that restrict abortions, states have been very loath to try to actually criminalize the patient, the woman who is pregnant and getting an abortion. And because it's not politically popular to try to penalize, the pregnant person themselves. If you end up having the situation that we're talking about, that could change. It could be that, a likely scenario, for example, is that somebody who's pregnant and it's illegal in their state travels to a state where it is legal and gets abortion pills. It will be quite easy to do that if they can get to that state, and there will be funding mechanisms set up to help people do that. States that ban abortion are going to try to go after providers in the states where it's legal, but it's going to be very difficult to do across state lines. And states like Connecticut are already taking steps to protect their doctors and saying, we're not going to share information with investigative information with a conservative state, for example. We're going to insulate our providers. So it may be that if a state like Texas wants to actually enforce its ban, the only person who's actually a resident of the state who's involved could be the patient. And so that's one scenario that people are talking about. But, abortion is always a lot about kind of politics and message. And rallying the base, whichever side represents. So it's always been the case that, anti-abortion states have passed laws that really don't stand a chance in court. They rally their base, they get people excited. They have the benefit, say, to the anti-abortion side of tying up the abortion rights side in court because they have to sue to block it. And so there's a lot of kind of messaging and politics that is at the root of this, and it may not necessarily be that important to these states to actually have somebody to punish. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, fair enough. Although we are finding that things that once were thought to not stand a chance in court do in fact do so. To turn, this is going to be an issue, obviously, that we're going to be wrestling with for quite some time. To turn to COVID, which you've certainly covered a lot, have we, as a society, come to the realization that we're simply going to have to live with this illness and deal with it in that kind of a way? Even to come to the studio today, the subway car I was in was fairly crowded, and at least half the people were not wearing masks. Now, I don't want to make too much out of one subway ride, but are we all collectively coming to the sense that this ain't going away, and let's just get on with life?
You know, one of the things that's been so kind of striking about this pandemic is that it's really been hard to say that anything has been a collective
Right.
realization. You know, the divisions that exist in this country also obviously exist over COVID. But I do think that public health authorities and the messaging in many communities and the steps that many local communities are taking are trying to sort of signal that, or trying to get us to the point where we really have to acknowledge that this is a virus that's going to be around, and we are going to have to live with it. And fortunately, we do have a number of tools now, vaccines, some therapeutics, that can allow us to, and some just institutional knowledge now, medical knowledge about how to treat this virus and how to prevent it, that make it easier for us to do that, to sort of say this is something that we will be living with. We have to be prepared for new variants, or as we're seeing, right now, cases are going up with some of the Omicron subvariants that have been circulating recently. But we also have to realize that there are costs, societal costs, mental health costs, to economic costs, all of that, to being on lockdown and keeping strict restrictions in place. And so we are going to have to move to a point where we can take precautions when we need to, and also kind of continue to live our lives.
We have a very few seconds left. Are there other horrors that await us post? I mean, this is your field. Post Omicron, post all of this, are there new disasters ahead as the world warms?
You mean with COVID, or just
in general, with infectious diseases? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, that's a big question to end on. I mean, sure, you're right. Unfortunately, we have to confront all sorts of issues that are related to climate change, and also, physical health. I mean, there are going to be new COVID variants. I would not at all be shocked to see a new virus emerging. We were not prepared for this one. The world wasn't. The United States wasn't. We need to try to make sure that we are prepared
for the next one. Okay.
And so, it's a difficult, tension-filled time, and there are a lot of things that we need to be on guard about. But we also do, to end on an optimistic note, have a lot of tools that are at our disposal, and the potential to develop tools to help protect ourselves.
Okay, optimism within the pessimism. Here we go. Thank you, Pam Bellick. Next up, Rikers Island and the state of policing. Welcome back. Rikers Island, one of the world's largest jails, has been slated to close by 2027, but right now the jail continues to be in disarray. The Times recently reported on a fight night at the complex, and staff absenteeism and violence seem to be at all-time highs. The most recent news is that the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan has written a letter in federal court suggesting that the jail be placed under the control of federal court. It's an extraordinary measure indicative of the dysfunction within this notorious complex. Jan Ransom has been covering Rikers and crime since 2017, and she joins us now via Zoom. Welcome, Jan. Plain and simple, How did Rikers Island go from being a big problem to seemingly a hopeless mess? I mean, what are the core issues?
Sure. I mean, there's plenty. I mean, what we've seen happening here has been going on for decades. You have hundreds of officers not showing up to work. Violence is at an all-time high with stabbing and slashings at the highest level it's been in years. The Rikers Island Jail Complex has been under federal monitorship, and things are seemingly getting worse. And we're now at a critical point where, as you said, the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan is, suggesting that perhaps we've reached the end of the road and receivership may be the next step for Rikers Island.
The number of inmates, I should say, who seem to have mental and emotional problems strikes me as being much higher than in the past. Again, do we have a sense of why that is? I'm really not clear about this.
Sure. I mean, there's any number of, factors, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly, why the numbers are increasing, but that's something that we've definitely seen at this point. At least half of the detainees on Rikers Island, so that's half of over 5,000 people, have mental health needs. That's a figure that has grown in just the past 3 years. So it's definitely something that I think we're seeing, not just within the jail system, but just, in terms of the drivers of crime as a whole.
If the feds do take over control in some way or another, and we won't know that for several weeks at least, do we have at least a sense of what that might look like? I mean, just a federal official will decide policies. I'm just not clear. Again, I suspect
Yeah,
many viewers are.
sure. Happy to break that down. I mean,
Please.
so, right now, Rikers Island is under the control of the city. So if it's placed into a receivership, you'll have an independent official who, is not beholden to the local rules and laws or even the politics that have seemed to, hamper mayors and commissioners from before. This official, this receiver would not have to deal with any of that. And so he or she could do what it takes to right the ship in terms of, even bringing in outside consultants, hiring outside of the city's jail unions, which currently the city can't do. So an outside receiver, could pretty much do what he or she needs to get Rikers under control.
The previous mayor, Bill de Blasio, proposed closing Rikers and spreading the inmate population among four boroughs. Staten Island was excluded. Is that plan still in existence? It has obviously run into strong resistance. I can't think of a single neighborhood that wants to have a prison in its midst. That's just human nature. And also, we're seeing protests in Lower Manhattan over plans to build sort of a prison high-rise on what's known as the Tombs, the Manhattan detention complex. Where does the plans to spread out the Rikers population stand now?
So the plan is still moving forward, and you're right. There's been, an increased number of protests against it. Lots of pressure on the mayor to change course, and obviously the mayor's own decisions in terms of how to deal with an uptick in crime, violent crime recently. Bears question as to what it will mean to actually close Rikers. Part of the plan includes bringing down the number of detainees. And right now, it's close to the number of people that were in Rikers before the pandemic. And so it's unclear, how the mayor will both be able to close Rikers and also, move forward in terms of, his fighting initiative. So I think some of it is yet to be seen, but, the law requires for the city to close Rikers by 2027.
Yeah, so that's still in effect. I covered the Attica prison uprising back in 1971 as a young reporter when I was at the New York Post. The New York State prison population back then stood at a little over 12,000. That number soared to about 73,000 by 1999. It has since come down steadily, if somewhat slowly. It's about 31,000 now. Given the increase in crime, and certainly given the increase in concerns over crime, are we seeing a return to a lock 'em up, don't bother me with, niceties kind of mood that is abroad in the land?
That's a concern. The mayor has taken a number of steps that seem to give a lot of critics pause. He's, reinstated the anti-gun task force within the police department. And this is a unit that, was responsible for a lot of fatal shootings. He is cracking down on homelessness, people sleeping in the streets, on the subways. Um, he is also turning to sort of broken window style of policing, in which the police department will focus on low level crimes such as public urination, public drinking, even targeting dice games, which the mayor believes tends to turn violent. And so you do have a lot of people, many in city council, advocates concerned that this will ultimately, resort back to a Giuliani era style of policing in which Black and Hispanic people were targeted.
But are there criminologists, others who specialize in this area who feel it's possible to put broken windows theories into effect, to have plainclothes units and whatever without the excesses that we know existed back in the 1990s?
I think you have people sort of split on both sides. But if history is any indicator, there are these policies that have been in place, but oftentimes they're not practiced or used in a fair way. And we've seen oftentimes that Black and Hispanic New Yorkers are unfairly targeted in many of these cases.
Is there any way, given the realities of a city like New York and frankly many other cities, to have a crime strategy, an anti-crime strategy that doesn't target principally Blacks and Latinos?
That's a great question. And I think, again, it's somewhat rooted in the police department in terms of, it being able to practice strategies that do not target people. But, if history is any indicator, we've seen time and time again, not just in New York City, but in other major cities, that it often doesn't play out that way, unfortunately.
Bail reform has been a big issue, of course. It has basically pitted Mayor Adams against much of the New York State legislature and much of the New York City Council, for that matter. The same could be said about Governor Hochul on this. Do we have a sense of who's more in touch with the popular mood on this particular issue? Is it the mayor and the governor, or is it the lawmakers?
I think a lot of people are split on this. You have some New Yorkers who, want to see stiffer bail laws, and then you have others who, do not. Um, Ultimately, what we saw were, modest changes to the bail law where some offenses such as shoplifting could result in someone being held for bail, which is not something that we saw before. And you have people on the other end of that saying that it's not right. Often shoplifting, at the root of it, is an issue of mental illness, substance abuse, issues that should not be penalized through the jail system, and particularly at a time when we see Rikers is in such a mess. But yeah, you have people on both sides of the coin here.
Right. By the way, has anybody proposed what we will do with Rikers Island? Should it be removed as a prison? I'm not sure I ever read.
I haven't heard much on that. I mean, I think some people have suggested different ideas, but nothing that's like concrete at this time.
So I can't buy real estate there yet. Okay. Okay, probably not. An interesting statistic for me has been the fact that in state prisons now, in New York State prisons, as I said, the population is about 31,000. 1 in 4 are over the age of 50, which I think is significantly higher than traditionally. And presumably those over 50 are probably less of a threat to society than younger folks. Is this a concern that we have a population that is getting too old to really be in prison and could safely be released, if only on parole?
Sure. I mean, that's been a debate that's been going on for at least a couple of years now. And, that's a great point. I mean, you have people who are aging, and, the argument is that they are no longer a threat and should not be held in prison systems that, in a lot of cases cannot care for them in the way that they need to, right? I mean, if you're aging throughout the prison system, you often have lots of ailments that just become more and more difficult to address while in prison, especially particularly during a pandemic. But yeah, definitely a lot of people suggest that, you can stand to empty out the prisons, and, allow these people to, have a chance to live in society, and enjoy the rest of their lives. So definitely.
Something to look at for sure. Thank you, Jen Ransom.
Thank you.
For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Clyde Haberman.